Hello and welcome to section 8.1 ratios and proportions, and in this video the first thing that we're going to talk about is what a ratio is. And a ratio is basically if you have two quantities A and B that are measured in the same units, that's the key here, is same units, then you have a ratio of A to B, or A as a fraction of B, or A colon B, where B is not equal to 0. So basically if I have something like 4 meters over 2 meters, that's a ratio. If I had 4 inches over 2 feet, then that wouldn't be a ratio until I get them in the same unit. So that would be something like 4 inches and 24 inches, then you have a ratio. So make sure that you are paying attention that they have to be in the same units. They can be written as a fraction, which is the way I wrote them down here. You could write them as 4 to 24. You could reduce them, or you could write it as 4 colon 24, which is read 4 to 24. So these are all different ways to write a ratio. And if you have two fractions, two ratios that are equal to each other, then you have a proportion. So if I had 4 over 24 as my ratio, and maybe I reduced it and I turned it into 1 over 6, then this would be a proportion where you have two fractions equal to each other. So now we're going to use these ideas of ratio and proportion to help us solve a problem here. So in our first example here, they're telling us that the perimeter of an isosceles triangle is 56 inches. The ratio of LM to MN is 5 to 4. Find the lengths of the sides and the base of the triangle. So we need to think about this a little bit. What do we know about isosceles triangles? Well, hopefully you remember that isosceles triangles are two sides are the same, and so that would mean since these base angles down here M and N are the same, that would mean that LM and LN are the same. And since they're telling us that the ratio of the sides of LM is 5 when MN is 4, if I was to put another 5 over here, if I take 5 plus 4 plus 5, 5 plus 4 plus 5, well, if I add those up, I get 14, which doesn't equal my perimeter of 56. So that means that there must be some number multiplied by each one of these guys to get a perimeter of 56. So I'm going to say 5x plus 4x plus 5x will equal 56. And so I just went with the ratio that they gave me, 5 to 4, but since they didn't add up to be the perimeter I wanted, there's got to be a common number for all of them, and that's where I got the x's from. It's going to be the same number, so I end up with 14x equals 56, and if I divide by 14 on both sides, I believe x would come out to be 4. So if I take 5 times 4, which is 20, and 5 times 4 is 20, and 4 times 4, which is 16. And now if I take the sides of 20 plus 16 and add them up, I get 56. So to find the lengths of the sides, the side lengths were 20, and the base was 16. So LM equals LM, which was 20, and MN, which is the base, was 16. And so that's what they were asking me to do, and I just thought about it in terms of my ratio and my congruent sides there. So then we have some properties that we deal with proportions, and basically we have the cross product property, which is a way of undoing proportions, setting them equal to each other. We would multiply A times D equals B times C. But if you don't remember that, just think about it in terms of an algebra problem, and we could go ahead and solve this. Well, if I say I was solving for A, say that's what I wanted to solve for, well, what would I do? Well, I'm dividing by B, so I would multiply both sides by B. Well, that would cancel out the B's on this side, and I'd be left with A equals C over CB over D. Well, then how do I get rid of the division? Well, I would multiply by D on both sides, which then gives me that AD equals BC, which is our property that we're dealing with. Now, the reciprocal property is basically saying that I can kind of flip these guys around and it's not going to matter as long as when I cross multiply them, I get back to this AD equals BC. And you can see that A times D will equal B times C. So make sure you copy these down. And then there's the additional properties, which are basically reciprocals, and our cross multiplication will be the same. So make sure you get down all 4 of these properties, and then I've got 2 examples for you, and then we'll let you go when we get to class. So now when I've got these 2 examples down here, to undo this, if I was solving for x, the first thing I would do was I'm going to use the cross product property, which is basically what we call cross multiplication. So I have 4 over x equals 5/7, and if I multiply, basically I'm multiplying 5 and x together to get 5x, and 4 and 7 together to get 28, and then I would divide both sides by 5, which will give me 28 over 5, or approximately 5 and 5.6, I believe, is what it comes out to be when we were if we were to divide those out. So here's the situation. If you get a problem like this and you don't know what to do, you could always just solve it algebraically. And maybe I don't like that I'm dividing by x, so I'm going to do that just real quick over here. If I don't like that I'm dividing by x, I'm going to multiply both sides by x, and so I'm left with 4 equals 5 over 7 times x. How do I get rid of a division? Well, I would multiply by 7 on both sides, and so that would get rid of that division, so I'm left with 5x equals 28. And just remember, all of this is algebra, so I'm going to divide by 5, and again I'm back to the 28 over 5, which I had originally. So if all else fails, do your steps of algebra and you will get to the same answer. It just takes you a little bit longer. Same thing with this guy up here. If I was to do the cross product property on these, I'm going to get 5x equals 28 when I multiply the 5 and the x together. That gets me that right there, and 4 times 7 is 28, which will give me that. And then if I solve it by dividing by 5 on both sides, again, I'm going to get 28 over 5. So then the question is, what do you notice about both A and B? They're the same, but the difference in these guys is that we used property 3 to mix them up. We did 4 over x is the same as 5 over 7. Well, they switched the x in the 5 places, which was what is happening here in additional property number 3. They switched the b and the c places, but they still get the same thing when you do the cross product property. So make sure you get these down and come to class prepared.